Okay, that looks smooth.
Okay, good.
I think we're good.
Well,
All right.
yeah, thanks for having me on as a guest. I really appreciate it.
No, absolutely my pleasure. I am a firm believer in the idea that if your ideas cannot be challenged, then they aren't really ideas worth having. Um, and like the idea of having, I've often wanted to do this with people where I would take your position, ask questions about things that they think they believe, and make sure that they understand where they're coming from and that they understand how their ideas work in a greater context. So I appreciate you coming on and doing this for me. So thank you.
Yeah, I don't consider myself an expert. I have been involved in the transhumanist community in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I've thought about some of these issues, but not nearly as deeply as you have. So, you know, I've been this conversation was inspired by some comments that I made in your chat, which is sort of, I guess I'd call it more questioning than challenging, right? So,
Yeah, I mean
like,
challenging in the like in the most charitable sense, right? Like because we
yeah,
are friends, we are on our best behavior. We're here. We're both pursuing a greater truth rather than like I'm going to dominate you in the marketplace of ideas. Um. So yeah, and it goes to a broader beyond just like the idea of transhumanism and things like that. This is, leads us to the, like the socio-economic theory of everything. Everything is interrelated because, as Old Lobster likes to say, AI acts as a mirror, and it will, show us exactly who we are.
right.
So, if you want to introduce yourself, feel free to do so, and we can begin in whatever format you'd like to.
Sure. I'm a streamer. I stream mostly philosophy and science. My background is in physics. I left physics after graduate school and went into software. Um, and I've been very interested in rationality and the general absence of rationality in culture in general. But like I say, I've also been interested in transhumanism. I read The Age of Spiritual Machines by Ray Kurzweil and found that very inspiring, and was particularly struck by his prediction that by, I don't know, just a few years from now, $1,000 PC should have the same raw computing capacity as a human brain. He calculated that based on the number of synapses in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
It turns out since then we've learned that there's a lot more complexity in dendrites,
Mm-hmm.
maybe a couple of orders of magnitude. So his calculations were wrong. But to me, this was the most remarkable thing about what he was saying is if $1,000 PCs would be as smart as humans, um, then the world is going to change. In Of course, uh, Ray Kurzweil was incredibly optimistic about the things that would happen. But um, I think that the issue with AI, as I see it, is that the only thing that can prevent our AI future is something worse than AI.
Right.
So it's likely to be it's going to be it's not we're not going to have $1,000 human brains around anytime soon, is my guess. But it's still, the advances that we've seen recently are very significant and they're accelerating. So
Yeah. No, I mean, I'm
yeah,
excited about the potential and always concerned about the, the downfalls that, could potentially await us. But like over focus on the downfalls, I think can lead to like a doomerism in which you throw yourself at the whims of the wind as opposed to actively participating in the project. So, I be the change you want to see in the world. I want AI. I want people talking about AI, so I'm out here doing it.
And doing a great job too. Thank you.
Thank you. So, what do you got?
So I think the first suggestion about a conversation that we had in this general area had to do with structure
Mhm.
for people. I think that if you gave you and I a universal basic income and all the time in the world, we would have a lot to do.
Mhm.
Um, I think that for a lot of people, that's not the case, right? I think for a lot of people, they're going to be looking in their community for structure,
Mhm.
right? I mean, it's possible that we could imagine some world in which everybody just enjoys playing video games and they get sucked into some virtual world made by someone, and that's the structure that they have. But uh, I mean, I'm not a gamer, so I'm not well positioned to to say how much structure, how much happiness people would derive from that kind of existence.
Mhm.
Today, I feel that many people do get something from work.
Mhm.
We certainly don't get it every day. Um, so that was my question to you. I felt that you were pushing back on that
Well,
and seemed to think that in a world without work, that we would not need to create a structure for people to live their lives in.
mhm. And I do feel that way. And so I think that people, like, you refer to it as work, and I would classify it as um a activity and accomplishment, right? Like that. I don't disagree that not everyone wants to lead, not everyone wants to be in charge of any particular product or project. And I think that there will be emergent individuals and personalities within a space who are good at that kind of thing. There are people who are good organizers, there are people who are good directors, there are people who are good doers, right? Like they don't even want to think about it. They just want to be told what to do so that they can think about whatever they want to think about. And like having done put the shovel in the ground, turn over the dirt work, there are elements to that that are appealing. Like one of my favorite jobs I ever did was being a dishwasher, right? Like I was not involved in direction, I was not involved in any of that. I just did the work. But like my position within the company was important because if the dishes were not clean, then the food didn't get out, that kind of thing. Um and that's what I see, like the people who want to do stuff are going to still do stuff. They're going to have an idea like how much better would the community garden be if none of the people who were involved in it had to go to work, right? And work different schedules, take care of their own lives and everything else. They had more available time within a day where they didn't have to worry about survival or anything else. That is like that writ large is how I view people's behavior once they have some sort of universal basic income. That there won't be, we don't need to top down a structure onto people. People will create their own structures naturally within their, respective communities.
Another point that came up had to do with status,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, I forget the author of the book. The book is called Machiavellian Intelligence,
Okay.
and it's about the similarities. Like, why is it that humans and rhesus macaques are the most successful primates?
Mm-hmm.
And the claim in the book is that in in both of our societies, we fight constantly for status. So instead of it being like a system where food comes in and then all the wolves fight over the food,
Mm-hmm.
um, it's something where we constantly fight for status, and then when the resources come in, it just goes to the top.
Mm-hmm.
And this is common among in both species. And I think that in human societies, this is a strong tendency. And now, just because it's, you might say, human nature to do this, doesn't mean that it's destiny,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, there are things that human societies and cultures do. But I'm wondering, what do you see as the role, if any, for status in this future society?
Well, one before I answer that, the idea of human nature is one of those that cause a lot of complications within conversations because people view human nature as divorced from the environment when they sometimes talk about human nature, and you can't, right? Like the reason why human nature, quote unquote, such as it is, exists is because of the environments of scarcity and different kind of hierarchies and things like that, which cause us to behave in certain way. Like my human nature is driven partly by my need to have food and housing and these other things and to compete with other people for these allegedly scarce resources. So if the resources are no longer scarce, then what effect would that have on this concept of human nature? But then to speak to your greater point that status might still exist, I default to to the Star Trek model in that regard is that specifically in Deep Space Nine, Ben Sisko, the captain of the space station there, his father uh, owned a restaurant, right? Like, and it's a post scarcity, post money world. So, like, there is nothing about that would be exchanged for goods and services. It's like in that environment, and it stuck with me because they're trying to figure out, well, how could you even run a restaurant in this? Why would you even have that? You just go up to the replicator, you make your food, Earl Grey hot, and you're good to go. But as someone who makes food, right, like and just used ChatGPT last night to help design a meal plan and like that, the act of creating food for other people and tasty food and like that, there is an element of time investment that translate into how people feel about what you've done for them, right? Like I've spent time crafting this over a period of time. I thought it out, all this kind of thing. So it has a greater impact. The handmade gift at Christmas time versus the mass market gift. And then within that gives me a certain status within my local group, right? Like here I have created this meal, and if it's good and they enjoy it, then that elevates me in the hierarchy, in the mind of people who are good at doing something. I'm good at making food. I am a guy that if I say, "Hey, I'm going to make some food," you want to be at that table. So I think that there are, and it's competitive, but it's not like directly competitive. I'm competing with myself to be better, and I don't have to compete with any individual. I'm not trying to knock out the number two guy who's good at making food. I just improve my own skill to the point where it has value. You know what I mean? Does that answer your question?
I think so. I mean, I can imagine scenarios where you get a sort of either friendly competition or just, someone that has, like, if you think of famous artists,
Mm-hmm.
you don't necessarily say, oh, well, this artist has outperformed the other by selling more albums, and that's why they are number one. But there's a certain amount of space for status at the top
Mm-hmm.
in mass culture, right? It does, and not all status has to be mass culture. Somebody could have status within a working group that's working on within a company or on a in a garden or something like this. Um, so it doesn't have to be something. And like you say, if it becomes detached from meeting basic needs,
Mm-hmm.
I just feel that um, maybe this is connected also to this idea of human agency. What is life going to be like when you lose some of the agency that you have because AI is doing all of the work,
And in
right? Like the
Go ahead.
research, for example,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, if AI is doing all of the research, obviously there's I guess there could be an industry in translating what the AI has to say into things that other humans can understand. Maybe there's something there, but AI would probably be even better than humans at doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess I have these sort of broad worries about, what the kinds of things that drive us today, not just, things like I need to eat my next meal where, I need to go to work and do this to pay the rent.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of self-actualization, are all of those sources going to be roughly the same? People will just still play roller derby and they'll play baseball and video games, and that structure remains the same.
Well, like so the first thing that comes to mind is this idea of agency is like how much agency any individual has in the current meta is directly correlated to like their wealth, right? Like the agency that one aspires to is like Jeff Bezos level of agency, where if I want something, I can have it. If I want to do something, I can do it. And there are no limiters, functionally speaking, there are no limiters to what Jeff Bezos can do. The man built a rocket and got to fly into space like that. That pretty much really puts that nail on the head. Most of us don't have anywhere near that level of agency. Even in our ideas of free time, there's a limited capacity of that which is actually free because it is tied into the more complex system of how the rest of our life works, right? Like I cannot stay up past a certain time at night because I have to get up in the morning in order to accommodate these additional things that have to be done. And if they are not done, then the system of my life begins to break down. And then the people within my household community are adversely affected by that. So, like, I have a limited amount of agency, and some of that has to do with, having to accumulate resources in order to, move on with life. Like, money is, the primary tool to acquire those resources. So somebody in the household has to make money, and if we don't do that, then we could in theory like this is something I wanted to touch on is this freedom versus responsibility as a slider. As you maximize one you minimize the other. um you have more agency on one level, if you don't worry about having a house or, water or food, but by the same token, your survival drops towards zero rather quickly. I think that there can be a level of agency that is achieved by people within the current meta that is between these two extremes that tends to lend itself towards thinking that the current meta is the best for providing that agency. Like once you achieve a certain, level of wealth, of income, of what have you, that it provides you with let's say more agency than not from your perception. Um Now you talked about self-actualization, and on Maslow's hierarchy, self-actualization comes up above, um, all the bottom three, four rungs of material needs. So you need to have that to have any real talk about real agency. And this is my perception of the entire thing: is that if you provide for those material needs, food, clothes, housing, all the way up to medical care, all the way beyond that to internet access and electricity. All the rewards from the modern society are available to you, not necessarily forced upon you. If you want to go rustic, go rustic. But that they are available to you, that moving the floor actually provides you with that level of agency that theoretically one should have, in my opinion.
So, for example, people could self-actualize through their hobbies or through their art,
Mm-hmm.
um, because they don't have to worry about working a day job, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and like the meme is that if people don't have to work, they'll just sit around and play video games all day. I am a video gamer. There is a limit to that. You can overindulge in it and everything else, but at a certain point, there are times when I'm really into the game and I really got to do something, and I'll spend like 8, 10, 12 hours on any particular game, like in a row, like hardcore. But it hits a point and then it goes down again, right? Like I satisfied that need and I want to accomplish other goals. And recently, I got into making before, before the pandemic. And then recently, I have rediscovered my joy and my love for baking different kinds of breads. So I'm back on that. And that is the kind of actualization that I would do, is that I would gladly be like the local artisanal bread baker, right? Like I would bust out some bread, I would teach other people who wanted to learn how to make their own bread, have some fun with the community of breadies, and we would have a good time and make this bread, and then, you know, and then have the rest of my day to do stuff. Like I wouldn't be worried about, oh, are enough people going to buy my bread so that I can pay my bills and survive and everything else. If just, oh, you want bread? There's bread. Have some bread. Like, and I find it amusing. I've made this joke like 6 times, and I will continue to make this. But like the anarchist, like one of the anarchist books is The Conquest of Bread, and it's like, yes, let's do exactly that. So that's what I like. I am very into taking these philosophical ideas and seeing how they apply to like material conditions, right? Like actually doing it. Like one of the ones is from each according to their ability, to each according to their needs. And this is the way that my household runs, right? Like if I can do something, then that is my job, and therefore the people who need the things like laundry and food, they get taken care of, and my status within the household is partly built on my ability to accomplish those goals and be that person who makes sure that these things line up. And then, like, if there's a day where, oh shit, forgot to swap laundry over, now there's a delay, there's a breakdown in the system, and I feel that internally as something. So I don't know if that helps, like, visualize where I'm coming from about that, but I hope it does.
I actually wanted to ask to clarify that a little bit.
Oh,
So you talked about to each according to his need, and you gave an example of how it is in your
mm-hmm.
life today. Presumably, there would be no, you wouldn't need to do those things, right? The AI could do those things,
Yes, that
right?
like for the need of, like, let's keep it simple. We'll talk about bread. Bread could be produced by the AI, and therefore the nutritional requirements of my family would always be met. Now I can go above and beyond and create bread of my own, which gives me the status element and is an expression, like, for whatever value love languages actually have value. Mine is acts of service. So, like, this is something that I enjoy doing, and is something that I fully understand and like can vibe with. So, like, for me, that is another aspect of making bread, and then I get the dopamine rush when people say, oh, I love this, right? Like, or I like this more than the other, bread that I get from the store or what have you, that kind of
Yeah. I think bread itself may be a love language. So
thing. Carbs, baby.
yeah. Um, I also mentioned the name Steven Pinker the other day,
Yeah.
and I think you wanted to respond to that. Uh, I'm trying to remember what the context was.
It had to do with abject poverty and how capitalism has
Yes,
raised and
yes.
his happiness and things like that. So one, I think that in Pinker's books around that subject, and, like, to this, my sources are the Unlearning Economics channel, um, which I highly recommend. Unlearning Economics does a good job. They're an economics master or whatever, like highly educated within the field, and does that, but has a, like, leftist bent to their ideas. But they also don't like when people misrepresent economics, which happens unfortunately on the left, right? Um, so I think they're a valuable asset to the community, and that everyone should, like, follow them, watch their videos, engage with their content. They have a video specifically talking about that in the Steven Pinker book, and, like, the methodology that was used to generate the numbers that Pinker does are suspect by other people within, like, the field of archaeology and like that. Personally, I run into an issue where, like, by defining these terms, right? Like, one, you're using GDP as your as your marker. Okay, that GDP only functions under, like, the current meta under capitalism, right? If I am a dude and I get up in the morning and I go fishing and I catch some fish and, maybe get some potatoes and like that, then I don't have a GDP and none of that. But then someone comes along and encloses my area and now charges me rent. Now I am part of the GDP. You know what I'm saying? This is a fundamental disconnect with this idea of poverty and the way that, like, the World Bank and the IMF and Steven Pinker interact with that as a concept. The other issue that I have is the qualifier on poverty, which is abject poverty, right? And how they have defined this as $1.90 a day. Now, I have not. I only have so much time in the day, and I haven't looked at what $1.90 a day means in any particular location. It's going to mean more in some countries and less in others. I just know that that is a difficult unit of universal measurement because it means more in one place and less in others. Like $1.90 a day in the United States is like you. That's not good. You can't theoretically. I could figure out math to do that, but you're probably eating beans and rice constantly, and that's all you get. Um, and then it's abject poverty versus poverty. Like, why do we even have this as like this is our measure? And it to me it strikes me as flawed on its face. Like we are not at the point when we have places like the United States, which has a tremendous amount of food that does get thrown away. Now, I understand that some of these numbers are like not all the food that gets thrown away is bad food or is good food, and there are reasons to throw some food away, and I'm not saying any of that. But there is good food that gets thrown away as because of part of the system. This, to me, strikes me as a flaw of the system, and like that is the conversation that we should be having regarding poverty is not whether or not X number of people or whatever percentage have been moved out of abject poverty, which is generally speaking a good thing, but that you could, if you define abject poverty as, well, this person doesn't have a house and they don't have a job, this person who gets up and goes fishing and then gets potatoes out of their garden, they could be qualified as being under abject poverty because, like how are we defining the surviving on $1.90 a day? But then once you
Right.
put them in the system to quantify that, now you have made their lives in some ways more difficult and have taken away something that they had, which actually had a greater degree of value than the $1.90 a day. And you took away
Right.
their
So
agency, right?
right. So if they were just doing, fishing, spending their day fishing, that doesn't show up on a tax return. And in order to trade that for something that shows up on GDP statistics or something that they have, or income statistics, they've basically traded 8 or 12 hours of their day
Right.
to get there. Right. So, yeah, I can see that. I mean, it's also not very relevant to the inequality problems that we have in the United States, where you have a very large proportion of the population that's sort of working poor,
Mm-hmm.
right? They have jobs and they're working long hours, but they're still in the context of American society in poverty,
Right.
right? Um, and so, yeah, I just think that, and I was talking about this on my stream last night, and someone mentioned that yes, free markets and trade are good and they help people, but that doesn't necessarily have to be in the context of what one might call capitalism. That there might be other ways of putting those things into context. So I don't. I mean, I'm. Um, I guess my view on. I guess here's. I should turn this into a question for you, Globus. Is like, what do you see as the most likely transition away from the current system that we have into a future system that you would like to see? Or do you not allocate probabilities in that way?
Um, like it can be difficult to assign probabilities to this because the system is too complex. because beyond just the system of capitalism as it exists within the United States and all the different players who exist within that and all the systems that have been built up or have accommodated themselves to the perpetuation of the system as it relatively currently exists, and then you extend that not only to other international companies but other governments with different ways of going about their interaction, both with capitalism and with the population and with these companies and all that stuff. So it's difficult to like assign probabilities for me, um, because I would need more data than I'm capable of understanding. The I think this is again the AI's like as it does with the weather, right? The weather system is incredibly complex. There are so many different data points to look at, and the AIs that are used in weather have, become increasingly impressive in their ability to turn out really good probabilities of like what is a likely outcome. The way that I see a potential, and this is like this is my main line of focus and attack, and like my ideal direction and towards an outcome, or at least a future state, not an outcome. Is that at some point there's a tipping point that is going to exist in which at least the realization of how much automation and artificial intelligence is going to impact the labor that's done by people reaches a point, the perception of it reaches a point in which those who exist in the higher echelons of these power structures are going to realize that they have fundamentally two options. One, they can provide us with meeting our material needs and providing us at least some aspect of this future in which our material needs are met and we have the agency and stuff like that. And this is this is the outcome that I hope for. Or two, they are going to, tell us to go fuck ourselves and, work it out on our own. And the reason why I think that is a less likely outcome than the other is because the same people who are aware of these trends, aware of what's happening, aware of the way that automation is accelerating and it threatens these job markets, are also aware of the way history has gone, where you have people with too much time on their hands and children with hungry bellies. Those people will eventually reach a point where they make a calculus, and that calculus always, historically speaking, has gone bad for the power structures, right? And their ideal is always like a status quo with a trend upward. If they want to maintain a status quo with a trend upward, then they need to go with option A in order to prevent that from happening. Because once that hornet's nest gets kicked, no one knows the outcome, right? Like you're throwing the entire status quo up into the air. Random events start to occur, random personalities start to show up, other forces that were either subjected by or like ostracized or like even pushed to the side and like unaware of these different forces that can occur within a system now have an opportunity to take advantage of these openings, and they will do so either of the volition of like just the momentum of forces, or because a particular personality takes control of a particular group of people and uses them at a wedge in a particular fulcrum in order to make something that they desire to happen. So if people want status quo with a trend upward to continue, they have to provide material resources to the people who don't have work to do.
One of the things that I imagined back in the day was that AIs would um, eventually replace everybody in a corporation. It would just be a machine.
Hmm.
Um, and that we could tax those corporations to do whatever we wanted, right?
Hmm.
That maybe that's one approach to solving this issue. Um, maybe another instead of markets, what about AI planned economies? Have you thought about that?
100%. Like one of the cornerstones of the things that I talk about is Project Cybersyn from 1973 in Chile. They had an algorithmic driven system, very like primitive by today's standards, but it was an algorithmic driven system that like they were in the middle of a coup and they had right wing forces that were blocking roads, and the algorithm was still able to direct resources that bypassed those roadblocks and got into the city. So, like, that was. That is my example that I go to of this is a concept that can work. Onto that, I tack on Walmart and Amazon. Walmart and Amazon are algorithmic, AI driven planned economies. They move the resources where it's most likely those resources will be needed through the very complex algorithms that they run. It all runs, basically on its own at this point. The only bottleneck to that entire process is the profit motive. If people could just get the thing that they needed sent to their local resource distribution center, delivered by drone, or people who enjoy getting in a truck and driving around all day and dropping stuff off to people. Like I assume at least some segment of people like to do that kind of thing. I used to enjoy driving around in a truck all day, listening to music and like that. Um, but like under that mechanism, what is it about that mechanism that currently exists, is available today, that prevents us from meeting everyone's material needs? And it's the profit motive.
I think that's also, I mean, that's also true, a big problem in healthcare in general, right? So in the United States, as I recall, the United States government spends about the same amount of money per person
Mm-hmm.
as the Canadian government. The
Mm-hmm.
difference being that for that money in Canada, you get universal health care and they don't have to pay any insurance on top of that.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the United States, we then have to pay a lot of money for insurance. Um, I know I have to pay a lot of money for insurance. um, and part of that is because there's very little profit in the Canadian system,
Mm-hmm.
right? There's actually fairly high profit margins in the US.
Yeah, the goal there, it comes back to what's the goal. The goal is not to provide people with health care. The goal is to make a profit making system. It's just another resource that people have to pay for, right? You are going to need to interact with some sort of healthcare professional over the course of your life. This has always been the case, going all the way back to the medicine woman way back when. Um, the difference being that the medicine woman was generally interested in keeping the tribe healthy, where the insurance company is trying to extract that profit. Like another example of status versus, another kind of driver. The There's two aspects to artificial intelligence that can eliminate a lot of that, like where that profit has to be generated. Like I've seen graphs. I'm not entirely certain how true they are because I haven't looked into the details, but I've seen it a lot of times is where the cost of actual healthcare has grown relatively small amounts, but the cost of administrating healthcare has grown like by leaps and bounds. It's huge numbers. The artificial intelligence is sufficiently, complex, dedicated artificial intelligence could do all of that without, um without need for any of the the people to get paid. And once you eliminate all the people to get paid, now it's just profit and the actual cost. And if we can eliminate profit, now it's just the actual cost. And the actual cost is just a matter of dedicating resources like to any particular thing. The other aspect of it is that our system for the longest time has not been in any way focused on any kind of preventative care. You can use artificial intelligence in line with different, like, giving people more access to some kind of medical supervision increases the likelihood of spotting things earlier, which increases the likelihood that preventative care will prevent more extensive and more expensive future care. So this is going to reduce that overall cost as well. Like the problem is, like, I currently go see my doctor once every 6 months as part of a checkup. If there was like an automated, and somebody's working on it, right? Like, I talked about this, and then somebody says this is our, like, auto doc system. It's a little room. You go in the room, it checks a bunch of things for you. As we get better with miniaturization, theoretically, we could even get like an MRI or CT scan on demand. And when you go, as an example, when you go to your local supermarket, if you go to your local supermarket, by the pharmacy, is there one of those little seats where you can stick your arm in and get your blood pressure checked? You know what I'm talking about?
I think I've seen those. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm looking at that as like a future model for this auto dock system, right? Like, I go to buy my groceries, I'm going to stop in with the auto dock, spend 10 minutes or however long it takes for it to do all its scans. It gives me a report. It sends a report to whatever, MD doc, MDAI, or a person if people still want that kind of thing. Um, who can then look deeper into it, make sure there's nothing weird going on. And now we've just created a convenient preventative care that's going to reduce a lot of things in the long term because we begin to catch more and more things early.
Speaking of, hey Brian, speaking of blood pressure sensors, everybody don't spend more on your car's diagnostics than on your human body's diagnostics. It's worth
100%.
getting things checked now and then. Um, so there was a mention in the chat. I'm afraid we've missed so many comments, but there was a mention in the chat about getting a new car,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, we could all have our basic needs met
Mm-hmm.
in this kind of system, right? But we can't all have a collection of 25 motor cars
Mm-hmm.
or electric cars, right? How do you see the system deciding how much people can have?
Well,
And like, is there like, so, I grew up in the 70s and 80s,
yeah.
and Apollo was a really big deal to me.
Mm-hmm.
And there were critiques saying, "Oh, why should we spend 40 billion in, I don't know, was it $1965 on the space program?" But it was very um, inspirational.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there was a lot of technology that came out of it. I don't. Maybe there are calculations that say that, we got it. It was an economic. We profited economically from the project, but it's also one of those things that when people reach these limits, you have, you know, speed records or um, obviously this is something that society has to come together and decide on how much they want to spend. But one thing that differences in the amount of resources have is that some people can have super fast cars or build interesting things.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it doesn't have to be something where, I think that the problem that we see today with billionaires spending huge amounts of money on personal projects is that the, if all the boats were being lifted, we'd probably not care that much, right? The problem is that
Correct.
what we see is working poverty increasing. And so that makes the situation sort of distasteful, shall we say.
Yes. Yes.
But there's certainly something to think about in terms of a society where it's run by AIs, and you have to think about what is there is still scarcity, right? We can't all have as many cars as we want. There is some level at which there is scarcity. There's no scarcity for basic needs.
Hmm.
But what do you think about that topic?
Um, a couple of things. One, in relation to like the idea of Apollo and why I see because I'm as hyped about like we landed a probe on an asteroid and got it back to Earth with stuff in it. There are currently more planets that are occupied by robots than there are occupied by humans. The other day, we watched a video of a helicopter drone that's on Mars, and the camera is on the other drone. These things are amazing to me. And within that context, a lot of what goes into a particular piece of spacecraft has to do with keeping the humans alive. If you eliminate all the stuff that has to keep the humans alive, then you could theoretically launch more rockets and do more stuff if we weren't concerned about that as an idea. And I would prefer that we kind of like go in that direction, but like there is a human, an anthropocentric need to have like a moon base and a Mars base. Like I understand that that is a desirable outcome for meat people to do, and that's where we are. But specifically related to your question of have as many cars as we want, I think that we actually could have as many cars as we want. I think that the want for the car goes down when you start to eliminate certain of these aspects. One, if I don't have to drive anywhere to go to work, I don't need a car. If I want to go to a place with, like, let's say I want to go with my family to an amusement park, then either I could take a better structured mass transit system, a component of which could be um, like autonomous personal vehicles, or I could rent a autonomous personal vehicle to take me from here to there, and then it goes about its business doing other stuff, and then I get it to take me home. So I don't need a car. There's a lot of reasons that I wouldn't want a car. I personally would prefer not to have a car because it does spend most of its time not doing anything, and it needs a lot of money in order to do nothing. And that irritates me on a fundamental level. But the the aspect of it being available to me, it's the agency argument again. Like, I want the agency and autonomy that's brought about by having access to a vehicle when I need it. So now I don't have the number, but I would suspect a large number of people feel some kind of that same way. Everyone who advocates for like the 15-minute city and the walkable city and these kind of things, they don't want a car. They don't want to own a car. They want, you know, for the few times that they might need a car, they would like access to one. So now it's just there are people who might want to own more than one car for some reason. Some of that is going to do with the aspect of conspicuous consumption, which is part of your status thing. And that only, as far as I can tell, that would only exist in a environment of scarcity because you're displaying to the community that you have more. So there is some asset about you that is better than the others because you are able to have more. When everyone has what they need, conspicuous consumption like drops in value. Like it's not as good a driver for status as other things might be. There are still, I imagine, people who are going to feel ways about like you having a lot of cars, but then I look at the collector community, right? Like people who collect baseball cards or magic cards or magazines or whatever the hell people collect, board games, right? Like there are board games that I have that are like out of print and rare and like I will never give up because of that aspect to them. So that is where I feel like people aren't going to want necessarily 25, 20, 35 Lamborghini Countaches, right? People will like start to look at older cars, right? Like as they do now. So I'm in a 1977 Chevy Nova, right, in mint condition. Well, that mint condition is improbable at this point in time. So now I'm looking for the guy who is really good at restoring cars. And his status is that restoring cars. I get the status of having this, and that status exists within the community who value that as a thing. So that is where I think that the idea of want is going to transform under these conditions. There are less people who are going to, you know, feel ways about what are basically demonstrations of how much money you have, and they are going to feel more ways about like particular elements that like no longer exist. Like this is something I actually see with a lot of the Gen Zers is they have an enhanced appreciation for things like that are like handmade or older, like antiques and things like that, because they live in a society where so much of it is like the same, right? Mass produced. And they can appreciate that authenticity and originality that exists within this piece, this stack of china, this lamp, these kind of things, because they've never seen it before and probably won't see it again anywhere else. And I see some of that, like that kind of thing, and that leans into the personal craftsman is a member of the community and generating status. I can have a 3D printed walking stick today so that I can have a cane to lean on, and then the guy who's really good at or the person who's really good at carving wood and creating something nice. Well, if I can have one of theirs, then there's like a shared status thing that I have this nicer original walking stick and they have another person with one of their walking sticks as opposed to like some mechanism of exchange or trade.
So, what about an AI walking stick versus one that was handcrafted?
That's what I mean. Like if I need a walking stick, if I need a cane, then the AI one will be available to me. I can just have it
Mhm.
3D printed. I'm ready to go. But if I want something that like more meshes with this personality, then I would want something more like original. And there are levels to that. There is, I want something handcrafted by Ivan because Ivan does really great wood scroll work and it's a beautiful thing and he only produces two a year and it's like, and I got one of them, that kind of thing. Then there's, I'm going to spend some time and I'm going to 3D design using this, chat device that is going to produce this particular thing that I created through the tool and then 3D printed out. And it runs the spectrum from I have a cane today to I have some fancy nice cane, but the floor is what I care about. That everyone who needs a cane and wants a cane has a cane.
So, when you think about presumably it's not just a floor, right? There's Well, that maybe I'm presuming too much. So there's a flaw, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do people still get income? So let's suppose that I create these amazing walking sticks,
Mm-hmm.
and somebody, there's a high demand for them.
Mm-hmm.
Do I get income for that, or is there no more money?
I don't see the need for money. The Yeah, there's no. In my view, there would be no income.
So so there's no income. I can have anything that I need,
Mm-hmm.
but what about how much stuff can I have that I want?
Um, it depends on what level of technology that we're at. Of course, there is a future state with the that is functionally the replicator, right? Like where you can have machines and nanobots and things like that that can take things apart at the atomic or molecular level and reform them, um, as needed. This solves the problem of garbage. This solves the problem of recycling. This solves the problem of like overconsumption, right? Like because when I don't want something, I just feed it back into the machine, right? And it turns it back into raw material. Um, until we get to that level, I'm like my rule is the birthday cake rule, which is you can't have seconds until everyone else gets first. So like if we give everybody what they need, then there will be theoretically some kind of surplus, or potentially some kind of surplus, but there might not even be, right? Because if you have an AI driven system, that's assigning resources to production, it would only assign as much resources are needed to produce that which is, needed at any particular point in time. Did that answer your question?
I think you were answering my question up until the last bit there,
Okay.
where you say, obviously, if we wouldn't want something like where the temperature of the Earth goes up simply because of the massive amount of manufacturing that people demand. Like everybody decides they want 5 cars and 20 TVs, and I want to wallpaper my whole house with TVs,
Mm-hmm.
or you know, TVs will probably be that probably will in fact be the thing that people do, and it won't be that expensive. But we can always imagine something expensive that people want, right? I want at least 12 free rides into orbit every year, and we can come up with something that people will want, right? People will always want more.
Well,
Um,
why do
but
you
you said,
why do you want these things? This is what it comes down to for me. Is like because like my daughter, you know, hit me off with a similar kind of thing. Well, well, what about if I want this and what I want that and that kind of thing? It's like, why do you want these things? What is it about them that you actually want, right? You want 12 free flights into orbit each year. Why do you want that? And do you actually want that?
because my neighbor has that.
But why do you want what your neighbor has?
That's human nature.
But is it? It's human nature under the current paradigm. This is my point. Like you, like the 12 free flights into orbit is some kind of conspicuous consumption, right? Like I have the ability to fly into orbit anytime I want. Um, but space isn't fun, right? Like this is something that I think that a lot of people around like these space hotels and this other nonsense, space is not fun. You need a special kind of bathroom, right? It is smelly. It is like you can't shower in the same way. This whole thing is like it sounds good the first time. And would I take a free shot into space? Absolutely. Because then I could say I went into space. Do I want a second one? Probably not. I'm good. You know what I mean?
Uh,
So
so
go ahead.
I guess I'm using space just as an example,
I got you.
right? But um, presumably AI could make space actually comfortable potentially, right? So that's one thing,
If we
right?
get
It
to
could be
Star Trek, yes.
applications, right? Um, but I'm really thinking something like, okay, or maybe I want to collect cars, or
Mm-hmm.
maybe I want to paint murals that are 40 miles high. I don't know. I just come up with something, right? There are going to be some people that don't are not materialistic in these ways, and that they don't really need this. But a lot of people are going to be saying, well, my neighbor went to space 12 times. According to my calculation, it costs this much equivalent this much equivalent $2023 to do that. So why can't I have, 288 electric sports cars? Um, and so it's just the more general question of, um, it can't just be it can't just be the AI goes, well, no, you don't need a trip into space. You don't need even one sports car, so you can't have it. On the other hand, there are going to be limits on what is the total production ability of the AI system, right?
Mm-hmm.
You could just say, if GDP increases, maybe it'll accelerate because of AI. You could just say, well, this produces this much wealth, and if we distributed that among everybody, then they could do these things.
Mm-hmm.
But um, obviously, some of that resource has to go into things like strengthening coastlines so that they don't sink into the ocean, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just more of a sort of a general question about how do you see the resources being distributed? Yeah, I mean, it is possible that humans will just be, once they have all their needs met, that they'll just get along.
Mm-hmm.
I I think that's far fetched,
Mm-hmm.
right? I think that have we seen that? If you look at people who are wealthy today, or if I mean, obviously, the wealth treadmill that we have today is based on status, right? It's like, no, I only make 30 million a year. That puts me so far down on the Forbes list. I'm nobody. I've got to do better,
Mm-hmm.
right? So there's certainly a treadmill there, and there are certainly people who are wealthy that don't feel the need for those things, that feel just incredibly lucky with what they have.
Mm-hmm.
But there's certainly a lot of people who also feel like they've got to push things to the limit. They've got to achieve more status. They've got to have more stuff. Do you think that that's just going to go away? Do you think the AIs will just decide for us how much is too much?
Well, like I think that one of the things that I saw when I read State and Revolution, right? So this is Lenin, real quick. Um, and in State and Revolution, Lenin was talking about how transitional states as we go from the current capitalist meta to in the direction of communism and all that. The fundamental underpinning of that entire thing, whether or not how you feel about the words communism and socialism and everything else, is that people in a particular state have a difficult time visualizing a complete transformation of that state and the behaviors of people within that state, right? Like everything that you're talking about exists within the current state of both real and artificial scarcity. So, if we eliminate real and artificial scarcity, how does that affect the psychology of the people who live within the society? Like, there are a bunch of knock on effects that are going to exist. Whatever the percentages, for example, whatever the percentages, a certain amount of crime is tied to poverty. So if we eliminate poverty, we automatically eliminate a certain amount of crime. right? Whatever that number is, doesn't need to be specific, but that is now gone. So when we eliminate that crime, we eliminate the punishments for that crime and all the knock-on effects of that crime as they exist, both in how our neighborhoods are transformed, to how our families are transformed, how our communities are transformed, all these kind of things. To visualize even that simple step, right? Like, which is basically like one step. You eliminate poverty, and then all these things happen, and then they're like, what does that look like? It's very difficult for me, right? Like, I can't imagine that because I live in this. My environment is the ocean. I cannot understand the land, right? Like, because I don't live there. I don't swim in it. I swim in, the water, and I communicate via sound waves that travel many, miles farther than they do in this thin atmosphere. The atmosphere is thick and it's pretty and it's cold and crushing in some place. All this kind of thing. Like, because my environment is this current meta, I cannot visualize what would happen to the people who live in a completely different meta. So I but I think that a lot of people's behaviors are driven by the current meta, right? Like, with all the things that we've already talked about, but also like how we signify status and um how we identify ourselves and what we value, and that kind of thing. The Jeff Bezos agency, right? If I have a sufficiently advanced AI and a sufficiently advanced 3D printing system, and and the ability to go where I wish to go when I wish to go there, and my people are fed and housed and clothed, and Medicare medication is or medical healthcare is provided, then how does that change me as a person? Then what do I want? Why would I want 25 cars? Why would I want those things? And I don't mean that in like, why would I want that? I mean that in the sense of looking at myself, looking inside, what is it that drives the things that I desire? Like, this is when people ask me advice about like how do I do stuff, and I'm like, well, what's your goal? Well, I want to make more money. It's like, why do you want to make more money? Money, like that, money is a tool. Money is a means to an end. Money does not do anything. Now, right now in the current meta, having a bunch of money is very helpful, but um, it is not the money that is the reason that you act. Because again, like, if I do something and I get $500, there are many things I could do to get $500. But then what? What did I want the $500 for? Well, I want to buy an Xbox. Okay, well then I don't want money. I want an Xbox. So how do I get an Xbox, right? And that is the real question. And I think that there, at least potentially, could be a lot more of that kind of thinking in an environment where our basic needs are met, where I'm not sweating where my next meal is coming from. I am thinking about what is it that I actually want out of this existence.
So there's something that's kind of uniquely American, I think, that we tend to, what are the typical career plans of someone leaving high school in America?
Mm,
It's probably something like NFL, NBA, astronaut, discoverer of the cure for cancer, etc. They're all like exceptional. They're not all. It's not an exclusive thing, but I think
right.
that the number of people that have those high aspirations. When I'm talking about agency, that's one of the things that I'm thinking of. And it doesn't have to be that way. There are plenty of cultures, I think, um, where people don't think in that way, right? Where it's not central to people's own view of themselves, of their own value as they change the world.
Hmm.
Um, and so I wonder, to what extent do you feel, you know, this is this conversation
Hmm.
is a lot of fun, but and streaming is a lot of fun, but to what extent do you feel you get value out of the thought that, hey, my stream is going to change the world because I'm going to lead the way on AI?
Hmm.
Or do you
I
get it? Like, yeah, I mean, it obviously we all have our own, I I wrote a book a few years ago thinking I'm going to change the world, and it hasn't. So it is a sort of a fantasy that we have, right? But but I wonder, if we didn't have the fantasy, what would life be like?
um. So you wrote a book. Do you know, and are you willing to say how many copies of the book you sold?
Probably about 500.
500. And out of the 500 copies that you sold, if you had to hazard a guess, any number will do, whatever you're comfortable with. How many people who read, who purchased your book, do you think read your book?
I guess a third.
Okay. So you got about 175 ish people who read your book. Your book had an influence on 175 people. So then those 175 people interacted both with your ideas and then with other people around them with those ideas. And then those ideas changed the way that other people interacted with the world. You did change the world. It happened in a very small way, admittedly, right? But that is the way that I look at what we do. I am like a the time travel analogy is the one that comes up for me. If I go back in time, I can't talk to anybody, I can't step on anything because one small change in the past changes the future, right? But in the now, we don't look at it that way. We don't look at the small changes that we make here as being able to change the future. We just think that we didn't do anything, right? I'm a Twitch stream that averages it's been going up. Like it was 13, now it's 15 average viewers. Today has been a really good day. I'm looking forward to looking at those numbers. But there are a percentage of people who are hearing our conversation and who are then going to take these ideas in this discussion and give them to other people, and they're going to exchange those ideas, and maybe one of those people or one of those people's people or one of those people's people is one of the ones who does a thing and makes a decision which causes a different thing to happen. We don't know. That's not our job to know. Our job is to do what we do and let things take their course and try for the best in every way we can. So that is the fantasy, right? Like if like and this is status right here. Here's Ivan Neo, here's Globus the Elder. We have the eyes and minds of 20 some odd people looking at us who bothered to take this time in order to hear what we had to say and what discussion that we are having. Like this is we could have this in this AI future, right? Like, I like these two guys. I want to see them interact. I want to hear this conversation. I want to hear what ideas they kick around. But we're doing it now. We're living the dream, baby.
So we could certainly do that if we were talking like, what would there be to talk about in an age where AI is better at everything than humans?
That is a
So
good question.
I wrote a book about rationality
Mm-hmm.
and the fact that it's so absent from culture. Um, well, it's probably like, if AI takes over, it's going to be even more absent, probably. Um,
Well, how would you
but
define rationality in that there would be less of it if AI took over?
Oh, I'm talking about epistemic rationality, like knowing what is true.
Mm-hmm.
The other kind of rationality is instrumental rationality, which is basically winning.
Mm-hmm.
And um, I think arguably you would need less of each if AI is always going to meet all of your basic needs.
Mm-hmm.
Um, if you wanted to know something about the world, you the machine would just be better at judging that for you, whether the question was about, physics, or whether it was a question about how many people really like you,
Mm-hmm.
right? So on every level, the epistemics of the machine will be far superior to humans. And so it would just be something. I mean, humans are not very good at rational thinking,
Mm-hmm.
which is why I think awareness is important, because this is a kind of human limitation that we don't work sufficiently hard to manage, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the example I would give is, you look at careers like aviation or food preparation,
Mm-hmm.
or healthcare. There are lots of standards and best practices and checklists and things like that. It's been professionalized.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason we professionalize it is that, although humans can have excellence in each one of these things, humans are flawed. Like, we have weaknesses.
Mm-hmm.
And so we developed this sort of, we professionalized it as a means to manage human weakness. And as a result, aviation is now incredibly safe.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if we had people just flying planes by the seat of their pants, right, it would just be horrible.
Right.
People would probably not be flying. But when it comes to rationality, people don't think about rationality in those terms at all.
Mm-hmm.
There's no rationality section at your bookstore or in the library. There's no rationality class in school. Um, and it's difficult to sell. I think it's also somewhat difficult to sell rationality because everybody thinks they already own the product.
Right.
Um, so that's what my book was about. I think um, I think in the future, if AI is doing the epistemics for you, in some ways it solves this problem, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
like the problem's managed. The AI can tell you whatever you need, and assuming you can trust the AI to give you the correct answer,
Mm-hmm.
the best answer it can, you know, problem solved there epistemically. In terms of instrumental rationality, like how does one win in this future society? Like, that's a more difficult question. Like, if you have all your basic needs met,
Right.
you could win by raising your status among your peers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, you could win by maybe better understanding the world around you,
Mm-hmm.
right? It could be that we'll spend our lives trying to understand what the AI is doing. Um, but that's that's still sort of a value question. In Harari's book, I think it was Homo Deus, spends that book talking about how the AI will know what we want better than we do.
Mm-hmm.
That raises some questions about instrumental rationality.
Yeah. There's definitely like there are definitely issues that come up in that regard, right? Like, and we're already living to a certain extent in that world, right? Like, there's the anecdote about the daughter who got advertisements for diapers because the algorithm was able to pick out the fact that she was pregnant before she even knew.
Yes.
And that is, I think that that particular element goes along with the idea of like privacy concerns, and privacy concerns are related to spheres of control, and that if people know the actual authentic human being that I am, that they will use that to leverage me in some way for their personal advantage. Um, but in as far as like winning, and this comes up a lot, like it actually came up yesterday. every Sunday, my friends and I, we get together, we play board games, we hang out, we watch football. And while we were playing this game, there's one of us who is very good at systems analysis and therefore is very good at board games, right? Like the the complexity of the system or the board game um is what keeps him engaged. But in this particular game we were playing, he was relaxed and he was just basically it's a game where you build the map, and he was just building the map. And then the function of the game prevented him from doing that anymore on one sense, and then a card came up that gave him the opportunity to score a bunch of points. So he was having a really good time just playing with the map. So he was winning. And then when the points card came up and he had the opportunity to win the game, it changed. It's like that Buddhist concept of desire, right? Like the desire came in, and then other players who were working not even intentionally, because I was one of them, I wasn't even aware of what he was trying to accomplish, but I interfered with his ability to win. So in that context, now he was having a bad time. And it actually went from having a really good time to having a bad time. And then he ended up winning the game by points, right? Like, so I got to watch this all in real time. And it was, how did he define winning at each of these stages? And that's something that applies to people. Like, how do you define winning? I don't define winning in competition to the accumulation of wealth against other people. I define winning as when I make some bread and the people that I care about enjoy that bread or food or what have you. This is how I define winning, but I've thought about it. Not everyone thinks about it. So I think one of the things that is going and has to change is how we educate people. Like less 2 plus 2 is 4 and more critical thinking, creative thinking, philosophical thinking, self reflection, like all these things where the the defining nature of the way you are educated is around this idea of self improvement, right? Like, because that will be one of the final frontiers that exist is the self. So that will be a place where the human has the most agency. It's a place where they can compete because they're competing against themselves. They're able to, to learn because they're having a unique personal experience. All these things will could make us better human beings and give us a redefined sense of winning.
That could be, all right. And there are, other societies are less individualistic and, they have different motivations for how they operate. So it could be that, with AI, that we will adjust what it is we value.
Mm-hmm.
Or maybe, AI, if AI knows what we value and can understand those dynamics better, it could be that we will, by interacting with the AI, we will know ourselves better and be able to adapt to this sort of society. Um, One thing I've noticed is that people tend to prescribe rules for society, or the kind of system that people want to see often reflects their own personality.
Yes.
Um, the friends I know who are libertarian,
Mm-hmm.
they want a society. My own view is that they want a society in which they would thrive.
Yes.
Right? They want a society because they are sort of self-motivated. They like solving problems. They like doing things for themselves. They want a society in which everybody has to do that.
Hmm.
Um, I guess you, even with AI, you still end up, don't you still end up with a society in which people want to choose how they live?
Hmm.
Like, is it going, we tend to think like, okay, well, yeah, we'll have AI, but it's really going to be like the suburbs.
Hmm.
Um, and it will be an open democratic society. And, I'll be returning to, what it was like being a kid in the 1980s or something.
Hmm.
That might be one way of thinking about it. All my needs were met,
Right.
very privileged. We went out, we played mini golf, we went to the movie theater, we laughed around, we went to restaurants, Um, what do you think the system of government will be, if any? Right? Like, what kind of legal structure will there be? Will there be states with different rules, or will that not be relevant? Well, I mean, if birth control is perfect, then maybe there would probably be no need for abortions. But there are people that care about abortions,
Hmm.
abortion rights or lack of abortion rights. Will those problems go away?
So this is the issue of people, right? Like, and
Mhm.
people tend to be, like you said, less than rational, right? Like, they will believe things that there is no evidence for. So some of the structures around that, um are obviously difficult to manage. um as I am in philosophy, like, anti-authoritarian, I don't want to impose anything on people, right? Even the people that I completely disagree with in that. So, like, for example, one of these libertarians, right? Or I'll pick a different person. You tell me if it's a valid thing. Theoretically, there at some point in time, I don't know how long that this would take, but there could be spaces where a person could have, let's say, a frontier lifestyle, right? Where I'm going to go and I'm going to be off the grid and I'm going to grow my own food and I'm going to, you know, hunt and, maybe have some goats or whatever the hell you want to do in that lifestyle. And then the question is, like, where does that person fit in with this? We would need some kind of space in order for that person to have that experience. And it's whether or not we can accommodate that, or do we have to value, like, the needs of the many over the needs of the few? Is there a limited resource? Can we generate additional real estate? Eventually, we could get into things like Dyson spheres and stuff like that. But for confining it to the planet Earth, I think that you're going to have a bunch of people who are going to live in the city, a bunch of people who are going to live in a suburban lifestyle, and there will be areas that are unoccupied by human beings. And I don't think, now this is speculation, right? But I don't think that there will be enough people who want to live the frontier lifestyle to occupy a significant percentage of that space where scarcity becomes a problem, right? Like, how much space would that person need? 1 acre, 5 acres, 10 acres, 20 acres? How much space do we have in which a person could live that lifestyle? Then the other aspect is if I have the AI as like, I have medical care on demand, then I'm not really living the frontier lifestyle. I'm LARPing. Conceivably, we could require the AI to grant people who want to withdraw from it the ability to do so. So it's like I am I am not participating in society anymore. You don't have to track me. I am going to go, and then they get, a plot of land and like that. It's plausible. It's complex. I'm not saying it's not complex, but that is a hypothetical framework that would work in order for these people to have what they want. And then we extend that into other different kinds of cultures, other different kinds of religions, where there are people who want to like live the Bedouin lifestyle. So there's an area of historically where those people have lived where they can do their thing and not have to and live by their traditional values and not have to interact with you know people who don't live by those values at any point in time. And this is the whole freedom and responsibility and everything else. Your freedom comes up against someone else's freedom. There is going to end up a limitation at some point. I would work towards setting that bar as high as is feasibly possible, where we can allow people the maximum amount of freedom and agency for themselves without infringing on the freedom and agency of others. Did that answer your question?
I think so. I mean, I don't know that I guess I asked a sort of impossible question anyway.
Philosophy.
Uh, uh, there's, I mean, there's what one of the things that I've noticed about some arguments, especially on the right wing, is that they seem very disconnected. Um, so I think that um, a lot of people who are against abortion, some of it comes from a sort of authoritarianism, maybe a sort of patriarchal view of the world, something like that. But I think a
Mhm,
lot of people think that, they're against birth control and maybe to some extent, at least for other people, divorce
mhm,
and abortion because they think that single parent families are bad.
mhm,
Now, of course, the logical disconnect is that um, you know getting rid of those things is not going to solve the problem, right?
mhm,
It's not like there's no connection. So it is possible that you know if there's infinite or everybody has everything they need, including AI childcare,
mhm,
right? That problem goes away, and that some of those are, I don't know whether they're arguments or rationalizations or confusions go away. So that's possible.
mhm,
But I do also wonder, there are people that have religious ideas about what is the best way to live. And then you start coming up with agreements which are not really based necessarily on material needs being
mhm,
met, right? So you could say like, there'll be people who will decry, sort of video game culture where nobody does anything, they're just playing video games. They might say that this is a terrible kind of existence, um, even if materially and in terms of the happiness of the people involved, they're still happy, right? So, and I don't know that there's any. I'm not going to ask you for a solution to that problem because
mhm.
it may not have one, right? It's just something just to think about. Does human government even make sense? in an age where AI knows us better than we know ourselves and knows everything about the operation of society, and we don't. Like, to what extent should we have more rights than intellects which are far above where we are? That, I mean, we of course want a system where human life is respected and preserved, but to what extent can we veto choices made by minds which are like just far superior to our own?
That is a valid question, right? And I think that it's kind of an evolutionary process where good outcomes will produce more um, trust, let's say, in what the AI does. In the beginning, I see the opening for um, like universal democracy, right? Like where every person through their connection with the AI has the ability to cast a vote on whatever they take interest in, right? Like these are all the options of things that you can vote on, and you can vote on them. And then over time, we will, because everything is proceeding as we would like it, we will abdicate more and more responsibility for those decision makings to that AI, because that is generally how things flow in systems. We don't care what's going on in government when government is working. We care when things start to break down. So as long as things continue to work well, then we will be happy to not worry about it, right? We're going to worry about the things that we want to worry about and not the things that we don't. And that is where I feel that this is, the as the process goes, we will gradually trust in the AI more and more because the outcomes are good.
Mhm.
And if the outcomes are bad, then we'll probably all be wiped out. So there's nothing to worry about there either.
I think this covers the ground that I had been contemplating.
Okay.
We've been chatting for a while here, so we
Yeah.
should probably let. I don't know if you saw any comments that you wanted to respond to in the chat.
I mean, for the most part, they're like arguing with each other, or not really arguing, but like stating a lot of their particular points. Our community, generally doesn't like do knockdown dragouts where they get angry at each other. They're willing to explore ideas and things like that. I don't recall seeing anything like they're talking about how AI and cell phones used to cost more money and things like that. Without the need for money, what will women see in men? Well, I mean that's a status question, right? Like you have to be you have to be worthy of being valued, and that's what it comes down to. So yeah, I don't have anything else. If you don't have anything else, it has been an absolute pleasure. I hope that I answered all your questions in a way that provided you with some additional understanding of at least where I'm coming from, even if you don't necessarily agree with any of it.
No, it was uh, very helpful for me to get to know your thoughts on these ideas. So, yeah, no, this was great. Thank you.
Yeah, and I hope that like this is for me personally as it relates to like Twitch. The exploration of ideas has generally been
The
in
potential
combination.
and the peril here are huge.
Thank you for the follow. People have generally like interacted with some kind of blood sport, right? Like where it's posturing like that, as opposed to actually exploring the ideas. And like, I'm not emotionally attached to any of the ideas I express. I just this is this is a way that I can see things going. This is why I think I can see them going this way. And I want to see more of this type of behavior across the board. And again, this is an example of being the change you want to see in the world. Like the 20 some odd people who have been here for this entire conversation enjoyed this. They will express their desire for more of this, both from you and I and other people that they follow. And they'll be like, hey, I know that you know how to yell at people all day, but have you decided to have a conversation? And here's an example you could see of that type of conversation and both the entertainment and education of value that can come out of that kind of thing. So thank you for being part of this. I really do appreciate you, and I'm glad we met.
Yeah, and thanks to the chat too for hanging out with us, and I've been trying to follow the chat as closely as I can while during the conversation, and some fun comments. I like the one about the let's see, it was about Globus underestimating the effect that the documented effect where people are in space and they look back at the Earth, and they just don't want to come back inside. When they're on a spacewalk, they don't want to get back inside.
Mm-hmm.
I like that comment.
And then
Globus hasn't figured on addiction to the overview effect of seeing Earth from orbit. Yeah,
I think that that is true for some people, um, and not like for others. For some people, the idea of being attached to nothing would be terrifying, right? Like that you're
yeah,
not grounded in any way. So like there is a balance there to be struck. And again, when you're talking about 12 space flights a year, that is the kind of thing that's there. There are people who are going to get into space as often as they can, but like when you look at it, it's like after like the second or third time of just going into space to see it, now what can I do while I'm here, right? Like that is, I think, an emergent property of the way that people operate. That you're going to go, let me do something while I'm here, and then you're going to interact with other people, create that community, and so on and so forth. And
right.
this is how I roll, baby.
They were talking about fully automated luxury gay space communism. And of course, space pickleball, I'm sure, will be a huge hit. So,
Well, they already got golf on the moon, so this is the next step, right? All right, my friend.
okay,
I will let you
thank you.
go, and by all means, in the future, if you come up with more things you want to yell at me about, you go right ahead and hit me up, and we'll
Oh,
do
I
another
will.
one.
Okay, thanks so much.
Take
Thanks,
care.
everyone.